Elon Musk wanted 150 megawatts of power, and he wanted it fast. He had found an empty Electrolux factory in South Memphis, and he wanted to turn it into a huge data center called Colossus One to power his AI initiative, XAI. In his opinion, he had a late start. Anthropic and Google were already surging ahead in the race for AI dominance, as was OpenAI, a company Elon helped to found but left in an acrimonious split with his co-founder Sam Altman. He was falling behind. To wait for a connection to Memphis's grid, a connection that could take a decade, would mean failure, to him. Remember, the AI race is driven mostly by tech CEOs' desire for ever more computing power and scale. So Elon built an unpermitted power plant from scratch, right next to Colossus. It took the form of several gas turbines chugging away out there in the open in South Memphis. Musk and XAI were never forthcoming about exactly how many turbines were operating at the time, in part because they had yet to submit permits to operate them, leaning on a loophole that says temporary generators, those in place for 364 days or less, don't need permits. Some estimates said there were 15 of these giant machines belching pollution into South Memphis. But it turns out that the 15 number far undershot the reality. Here's Memphis activist and organizer Amber Sherman.
It also wasn't until the SCLC flew a plane over XAI to show how many methane gas turbines they were actually using that all of a sudden people were like, oh, maybe this isn't the best idea.
The SELC, the Southern Environmental Law Center, hired thermal imaging cameras to be flown via drones over Colossus, and what they found was shocking. Rather than 15 glowing red dots, there were 35. More than twice as many as people thought there were. That's a staggering amount of pollution and noise pumping right into the historic neighborhoods of South Memphis. Historic black neighborhoods of South Memphis. Amber told me what that looked like.
And I went down to XAI myself and stood in front of it and filmed what the pollution looked like, that now all of a sudden people were paying attention to what was happening. When I showed them these large plumes of pollution, then people were like, oh, this is actually a big issue. We should probably look into it.
Take us to the scene. Tell us what it's like down there. What does it look like? What does it feel like? How close is it to the houses in Boxtown and other neighborhoods?
When I was driving there, it was about maybe 5 minutes from a neighborhood. You kind of enter into an industrial park. The roads are terrible, very rocky. Once I got to the actual neighborhood of Boxtown in South Memphis, I started smelling a horrible smell. It smells like dying dogs over there. Like it just smells like something is rotten. And then as I got closer and closer to XAI and the other industrial plants, a TVA plant over there, it just got even worse. Like the smell just increased. And I think it was obvious that, the amount of pollution they're putting in the air is causing this horrible smell.
It's possible that the people behind the data center explosion are lying to you about the harms that data centers cause. It's certain that those harms are often concentrated in poor or black neighborhoods. From Building Local Power, this is The Data Centers Are Coming, Episode 3, Contamination Without Representation. I'm your host, Danny Kane. Elon Musk's logic around powering his Colossus data center is representative of the AI race as a whole. Rather than go through established channels for building such massive, energy-consuming projects, he employed shortcuts of dubious legality and certain harm for nearby neighborhoods. This is how things work when you're in a desperate race for scale. Time magazine tech correspondent Andrew Chow explained it to me.
Desperate is the right word. These companies are desperate. They're ravenous, I would say, for compute, for energy, for water, for cooling. They're trying to spend as much money as possible to train these models so that they can be at the top of the leaderboard, and then they can win market share for their chatbots. So how do you train the AIs? You need to train them with these data centers, and these data centers, they need so much energy. Elon was behind in the AI race. He felt the need to move as fast as humanly possible. He thinks his legacy is on the line, and that by building as fast as possible is the way that he's going to cement himself at the top.
What all this means is that a few people have a massively disproportionate impact on communities nationwide and perhaps even globally.
The fact is that the AI race is being propelled by basically less than 10 guys who have an inordinate amount of decision-making power over how they move forward in this race.
It's an unavoidable fact that these 10 guys with a disproportionate amount of power are overwhelmingly white and rich. It's also unavoidable that many of the places feeling the impact of this power are decidedly not rich and black. The neighborhoods surrounding Elon's Colossus are a clear example of this.
Memphis is a very black city. Boxtown is a very black part of the city. It was started by former freed slaves. So this is a community of ingenuity and self-building upwards. But for decades, they've been plagued by pollution and by industry coming in and sort of dumping the worst chemicals you can think of on South Memphis. Companies and corporations prioritizing profit over the real harms of people in the neighborhood. And so you have generations and generations of COP-D and respiratory issues of people in the neighborhood, of just like waves of the different types of pollution and generations of asthma. Before Elon came, there was a company named Electrolux that set up a huge manufacturing facility right on the river there and promised to bring a ton of jobs to Memphis, only for Electrolux to close a few years later and move their factory to another part of Tennessee when, Memphis no longer was profitable to them. That plant sat unused for several years until Elon came looking for a big plot of land, looking for access to power, and looking for water. And Memphis really wanted to offer him all of that, at least the powers that be did, because Memphis has had a lot of struggles with infrastructure, and city officials wanted a big windfall. They saw how FedEx arguably has lifted up a lot of jobs in the city. They wanted their next FedEx. So Elon comes and the city embraces them.
The people in Boxtown had little warning that Colossus was coming. In Memphis, as in other places, the neighborhoods feeling the brunt of major polluting industrial facilities' impacts are not privy to the planning process for these facilities.
How this has actually played out is just NDAs, non-disclosure agreements up the wazoo in every single part of data center development. So most citizens do not hear about these data centers until they're taking down trees.
Sometimes people learn about these projects when excavators show up. Sometimes they learn about them through PR campaigns after the deal is done. Sometimes even elected politicians aren't aware of these deals until the ink is dry, as we saw in Tucker County, West Virginia. Here's Amber telling me about how she learned about Colossus 1.
I, like the rest of the city and most of the elected officials here, found out because the Chamber of Commerce released a press release announcing XAI and talking about how they were directly involved in bringing them here, how they have created a team of folks who will support them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, who've been available and helping them to move through this process seamlessly as they hope to build a digital delta. Even though none of us have asked for that, no one in the city has asked for that.
It almost sounds like the Chamber of Commerce was basically like making a commercial for Elon Musk and XAI. How did it feel to see that?
I mean, I was disgusted. I feel like this is kind of a pattern also that we've seen with the Chamber of Commerce. But I also think that, the way that they curated it specifically in a way of this big vision of what we need here, even though we have not said as Memphians that we want it here, but also in the way that they curated the rollout, sending out these press releases and putting out stories and showing photos of this data center, these model photos that don't actually depict what the data center really looks like. And I also was disgusted in the way that the media did no investigation. They were posting the same exact press releases, posting the same exact pictures, even though that's not what the data center looked like when you went there.
This Chamber of Commerce video comes out. Everybody learns about it. Citizens, government. It's the first time anyone has heard. How did city government react when this project was revealed?
Our city and our county government both were supporting it. Both of the county mayor and the city mayor put out statements of support. Different county commissioners and different city council members put out support. Congressman Steve Cohen, who represents Memphis, put out videos and was interviewed, saying that it was a good project to come here. And it wasn't until we as citizens were pushing back that some people actually changed tune.
A question I've really bumped up against, I've been working on this project for many months, is it's really clear to me data centers are expensive, they're polluting, they are massive drains on the resources of the communities that they're in, yet politicians love them. Like, it sounds like the city, the county, and one of your reps was like, all right, let's do this. So despite the mountain of evidence that these projects are harmful and don't even create that many jobs, why do you think politicians are still so gung-ho about data centers in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that most of them are thinking about the economics and that, bringing these data centers here brings all this tax revenue here. Our mayor, Mayor Young, has talked about it and talked about the amount of tax revenue that it was bringing to the city and how that kind of economic development is what we need, even though we as Memphians don't agree. And I think a lot of times politicians are only thinking in dollars. They're only thinking in, what financial benefit are folks getting. And they also realistically will never be impacted by the harm. He doesn't live in South, our mayor doesn't live in South Memphis. Our county mayor doesn't live in South Memphis, Lee Harris. These other elected officials don't live in the hood. They don't live in that area.
To learn more about Boxtown and the Colossus saga, I reached out to Dr. Sakobi Wilson, a professor and environmental health scientist who has done interesting work in South Memphis.
Traditionally, in science, folks do like top-down science. You hear the ivory tower, right? And everybody says, "Oh, we want to do science that's very like objective, dispassionate." I think that's I want to say any bad words. I think that's not the right way to do science. But I would say something bad, like But the idea is when you're doing science, you don't have to have a PhD to be a scientist. You just have to use a scientific method.
Talking to Sakobi, I learned that the issues surrounding Colossus, with rich white business people and developers exploiting a black neighborhood, are far from new. In fact, they go all the way back to the founding of Boxtown in the wake of the Civil War.
It's an unincorporated black community. So it's more rural, urban, but, also that rural mix. And when you're unincorporated, it's contamination, not representation. So when you're an unincorporated community, you don't really have a town mayor. You don't have like political power, a lot of voice.
I'm really interested in like the government implications about being unincorporated and like that being a reason why there's less political resistance. But just tell us about Boxtown, its history, past environmental issues, and what makes this community like ripe for Elon Musk for his giant project.
You have this rich history in our country with a lot of freedmen's communities, right? That once they were established, the fight against oppression didn't stop, okay? So you could see that many of these communities were still under attack by the former slave masters, right? They were attacked by folks who were not supportive of them being seen as fully human, not as chattel. Boxtown, like many freedmen's communities around the country, many of those communities, when you think about oppression and how racism reared its head and impacted their ability to continue to grow and prosper as a community, you look at zoning, planning, and development. These unincorporated communities, there's either one or two things. Either they have lack of access of what we call basic amenities, so paved roads, sewer and water infrastructure, good housing, or they also are used as a sacrifice zone. So you see it in Boxtown. And so the fact that they didn't really have a major voice is not by accident. It's called planning. And so we don't have a town mayor. You don't have a town council. The avenue of least resistance, it's going to be harder for them to fight back. And easier for the city also to say, hey, let's just dump all these facilities in an unincorporated community. We get the tax revenue, right? But they get all the harms.
The fact that Boxtown isn't rich, the fact that it's unincorporated, the fact that it's already home to polluting industrial facilities, tech billionaires see this kind of place and assume there's less political will to fight back than there is in wealthy white areas. It's just like the way Fundamental Data, whoever that is, saw a tract of old strip mine land in Tucker County, West Virginia, and assumed that nobody would fight back against the data center there. But more and more we're learning that these communities are tired of being written off, tired of being underestimated. Here's Andrew Chow from Time.
I've been talking to, community members across the country, and one refrain that I hear is that they feel like they were chosen by these companies because they feel like the companies thought they were the path of least resistance, that they would be able to come into certain communities that maybe haven't been historically very active or might be disenfranchised and sort of get run over to service these corporations' needs.
This kind of thinking isn't even necessarily secret. More Perfect Union, which makes great short documentaries about their mission of, quote, building power for the working class, has some really good coverage of the Colossus story. For one of their videos, they unearthed a podcast clip where a data center booster had this to say about Colossus.
Elon, what he did with Memphis is objectively somewhat dirty,
but he's also doing it in an area where there's like a bigger natural gas plant right next door and like a wastewater treatment and a garbage dump nearby, right? And he's obviously made the world a lot more clean than that one data center.
I asked Jacoby and Amber to react to the idea that since South Memphis is already polluted, one more polluting facility isn't a big deal.
I mean, dude, how dehumanizing. You're basically dumping on folks verbally who've been dumped on literally for decades. The dumping didn't happen overnight. The targeting didn't happen overnight.
Yeah, it's insane. The other polluting buildings need to go too. And I also say that like the community members there in Boxtown and South Memphis and in Memphis in general have been fighting against pollution for years at this point. Like that wasn't a new thing. I felt like, and I know a lot of other folks in the community felt like that Elon Musk thought we were the path of least resistance when he came here. And so he just thought, well, I'll just go there. They're not really going to push back. It won't really be an issue. And that's definitely not true.
It's clear that the Colossus story is threaded through with environmental racism. This is not a news story, as Amber explains.
Well, Memphis specifically is the largest Democratic voting bloc in the state of Tennessee. It's also the blackest major urban city in the country. And so those two things combined are definitely a huge threat for a supermajority. A Republican supermajority. So this scapegoating is Memphis is a black city or is a Democratic city. How long has that been happening? Is that a historical thing or is it a new thing? No, it's a historical thing. This has been a constant, really since the inception, before Memphis was even an established city.
One way the Colossus story connects to the history of environmental racism is in false promises of job creation by city leaders who embrace big corporate development projects.
There's been a precedent set that black people in our majority black city don't deserve good paying jobs. We have a warehouse industrial complex here based off of FedEx because they have a headquarters here, and all these other warehouses that won't hire people for full-time jobs. They're mostly all temp workers. They don't have benefits. And so now that they have that precedent set within FedEx, within these other, the Nike factory and all these other warehouses, other places that come here don't feel like they have to provide citizens with good paying jobs. They don't feel like they have to provide us with benefits or full-time jobs because the precedent that's been set is that people aren't offered those things. And I think that that's the big thing that folks have to actually take on, which is how do we make sure that we're bringing economic development here that embraces the full Memphian, that provides them with quality jobs and benefits, and that's not what's happening.
The harms from data centers are going to last long beyond the useful life of the facilities. Once the AI bubble bursts, the data centers will still be there. It's an old pattern.
When you think about historically, in a lot of communities I work in, we always talk about these legacy hazards. So from power plants, gas, coal-fired plants, to incinerators, to petrochemical operations, to refineries, they tend to concentrate in low-income communities, communities in color, indigenous communities, right? I'm framing data centers as an emerging threat, but following the same pattern of going to the avenue of least resistance. And you're seeing that across the country.
The pattern that Jacoby is alluding to is one of the things that drew me to this topic to begin with. What types of people and places are targeted for the harms related to corporate power is an animating principle behind my own research, but also the work that the Institute for Local Self-Reliance does as a whole. One of my first projects as the host of Building Local Power was our Power Play series, investigating the relationship between race and monopoly power, inspired by my colleague Susan Holmberg's landmark report of the same name. But ILSR's work on this goes much farther back. From the outset, ILSR's work has occurred at the intersection of environmental justice, racial equality, and corporate responsibility. Here's ILSR co-founder David Morris giving a speech in 1997.
Back in 1970, Congress passed the Clean Air Act. Part of that law was intended to reduce smokestack pollution. The regulations required industries to raise the height of their smokestacks. The reigning principle of the day was dilution is the solution to pollution. And the result? Well, the result we should have foreseen. The result was that a local particulate problem was transformed into a regional and even an international acid rain problem. Well, what if Congress and the regulating agencies had instead been guided by our first principle, marry authority and responsibility? They might have asked industry not to raise the height of their smokestacks, but to lower them, to curve the ends and put the ends into the window of the executive suite. And I assure you that if they had done that, design engineers would have invented and created zero-emission factories 25 years ago. By forcing those who make the decisions to be those who feel the impact of those decisions, we encourage better decisions.
Earlier iterations of this fight centered around the technology of trash incinerators. Originally pitched as a solution to the problem of landfill overcrowding, incinerators actually ended up being a very expensive and very dirty response to the trash problem. That didn't stop them from being cheerfully embraced by city officials looking for a silver bullet solution. Wildly, many states included trash incineration in their green energy portfolios, and some places still do. The end result, of course, was huge polluting facilities disproportionately sited in poor and black neighborhoods. My ILSR colleague Brenda Platt has been fighting trash incinerators for decades.
May 1986.
I was born in August 86, so I like your ILSR career. I'm also turning 40 this year.
I was a baby. I was just a prodigy. I started when I was a baby.
I talked to Brenda in hopes of gaining some context for the data center fight based on her long experience with resisting incinerators.
Trash incinerators in the United States are basically located in communities where people of color, especially black residents, are disproportionately impacted, and the largest and the most polluting trash incinerators tend to be in communities of color.
Do you think these corporations are targeting these neighborhoods deliberately? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think they target areas of least political resistance in the case of incinerators. While many of them are in low-income, predominantly African-American black communities, some are in very rural communities. A lot of them ended up, the ones that are in black communities, they're in urban areas because they're close to where the waste is being generated. But that's why they are impacting so many more millions of people, because they are located in urban areas. It's so severe. In Baltimore, where there is an incinerator in an African-American community, it is the largest source of pollution in the city of Baltimore. And it's emitting mercury, highly toxic heavy metal. It's emitting dioxin, which is one of the most toxic chemicals known to man, where there's no safe level that's allowed. And dioxin is actually produced during the incineration process, so it doesn't really largely exist in the waste stream itself. So these are highly polluting incinerators that are linked to a whole host of health issues.
Just because the trash incinerator fight has been going on for decades doesn't mean it's over. In a previous episode of Building Local Power, I spoke with newly elected Baltimore City Councilman Zach Blanchard. During that conversation, which I'll link to in the show notes, I first learned about Baltimore's Wheelabrator incinerator, still active, still polluting its predominantly black neighborhood. It's the largest single source of pollution in Baltimore, and I went to see it with Maryland clean water activist Jennifer Kunze. We get to cross this giant...
Yeah, it's an interesting area.
I suppose not many people want to take a walk to the incinerator, huh?
No.
Once we had found a relatively quiet spot next to the incinerator, emphasis on relatively, Jennifer got to telling me about the facility. So what's the history of this facility? How old is it? How did it get built? Tell me the story of how this massive thing got here.
Yeah, so this trash incinerator was built in 1985. It's 41 years old this year, one of the oldest in the country. And like the Frederick incinerator that was proposed back when I was in high school, like many of these types of facilities, and even like data centers, it was proposed as a solution to a crisis. There were a number of older and honestly worser trash incinerators around the city, burning city trash at the time, that were much more polluting, had to be shut down. And the local decision makers were looking around for a solution. What's one easy thing we can build to solve this problem for us? And the waste incinerator industry knocked at the door and said, here I am. And so despite local opposition at the time, the industry was able to get built here. And once a facility like this is built, it's so incredibly much more difficult to get it shut down or to transition to something better. Because every decision maker loves, we build this one thing, it's a magic box that solves our problem, but that's not reality.
Do you know if there was local opposition in the 80s when this was...
There was, yes. There were definitely efforts to shut down the old incinerators, one of which was close to my home now in East Baltimore, because those were massively polluting, terrible facilities. But there was also opposition to building this new one. Residents at the time did not think that this was a solution. And one of the saddest stories is the reason that this facility ended up here instead of elsewhere in Baltimore City. An incinerator was first proposed in further north in Baltimore, closer to wealthier, whiter communities. And those communities were able to prevent it being built there. And so it got put here in South Baltimore.
Places like South Memphis or South Baltimore are targets because of a perceived lack of political will. But that perceived lack of political will is just a matter of tech bros underestimating residents. These places are filled with people fighting back. We saw it with Tucker United. We're seeing it in Boxtown. I asked Jennifer how people are doing it in South Baltimore.
I think it really starts with paying attention and talking with your neighbors. So if you're lucky enough to live in a community that still has a robust local paper, that's a good resource. But if not, your county council, your city or town council is going to be having public meetings where these issues are being talked about. So you can be your own reporter. Watch the agendas, live stream the meetings, even attend a meeting, and don't speak if you don't feel comfortable yet to speak. But start to watch with your own eyes what's happening.
One thing struck me about what Jennifer said. Be your own reporter. It's impossible to ignore the role of local journalism in the data center story. Sometimes good things happen because of robust local journalism. An Amazon data center in Tucson, Arizona was successfully stopped by local activism. The Tucson fight started when a small, local nonprofit newspaper trawled through enough documentation to discover that Amazon was behind the project referred to only by the codename Project Blue. In Tucker County, West Virginia, Fundamental Data's mysterious data center project was only discovered when a local resident read her newspaper closely enough to find a mandated air quality permit notice. Groups opposing a major new data center project in Loudoun County, Virginia, even scored a major victory simply because a local developer failed to run a mandated newspaper notice. But as much as local journalism can help the data center fight, a lack of good reporting can hinder it, or at least make activists have to fight harder. I asked Amber about the local media in Memphis.
I would say our local news and local journalism sucks. They're lazy. They're very much, if it bleeds, it leads. They talk about death and murder 24/7. And so I've noticed that they don't really do much deep dive investigation work, right? They don't really look into things. And so it's easy for them to just repost a press release. I shouldn't have to become a journalist because the journalists here are lazy and suck up to corporations and, just think that it's not important enough. But two, we have to do that because if we don't, then our community is going to suffer.
Knowing how much local journalism, or the lack thereof, played a part in this story, I couldn't let the chance go to ask a reporter at a national legacy publication about it. So I asked Andrew Chow from Time to share his thoughts about whether the disappearance of local media is playing a part in the data center fight, and he shared some reflections from his time reporting in Memphis and Texas.
Absolutely, and especially because a lot of these data centers are going up in sort of rural areas, which have lost any sort of local news coverage. And this is something that I've discovered in going to these Texas towns is there's nobody really combing through court documents except for public citizens with a vested interest. The trust in media is also at an all-time low. So people are not likely to talk to folks like me. What I found is there are whisper networks through communities where they're talking about it on Facebook or other means, and a lot of times a community will be very in the know before media gets wind of it because we're just not there.
I'm interested in new ways of telling the stories that local journalists traditionally worked on. Amber told me about making TikToks at the Colossus site since Memphis newspapers are just recycling press releases from tech companies in the Chamber of Commerce. And then there's the folks at More Perfect Union with their great short documentaries. But regardless of effective local media or not, it's still crucial to organize on a hyper-local level to mobilize against corporate power. as Jennifer Kunze told me in the shadow of the Baltimore incinerator.
Even without that intermediary of a reporter, is really important for starting to understand what's happening in my community and where are the decision points where me talking to my neighbors about this could make a difference. And then talking to your neighbors, because some people, people are going to have different strengths. Maybe some people don't know about it yet but want to testify at meetings. Maybe some people would want to, bottom line, putting a rally together. Maybe some people even just want to do the child care or provide the food for a community event. And all of those different moving pieces are really important to pull together to make a change like this happen.
Yeah. If that's not building local power, I don't know what is.
Exactly.
That's really good. Thanks. Well, we should probably head back to the cars before we breathe any more of this stuff in.
Indeed.
Though the data center fight feels new and unprecedented, and in some ways it is, it's crucial to remember that these patterns of environmental racism are not new, as Sakobi Wilson reflected.
But we got to have more guardrails, and we need to learn from the past. And we're not learning from past mistakes when it comes to innovation technology, but not taking into account the externalities that are produced and how those externalities get concentrated in certain communities, certain populations, and then they get used as sacrifice zones.
Colossus One is far from the first major polluting project to try to take advantage of a perceived lack of political will in South Memphis. Amber and other activists in Memphis hope they can repeat their past success in fighting off such projects.
Memphis is the same city that defeated the Bahia pipeline, which is a pipeline, an oil pipeline that was set to run throughout the country and partially through several states, including Tennessee. And the pipeline would run under South Memphis, which is a majority poor black neighborhood in Memphis. They were actually going an extra 52 miles to run it through South Memphis because they were going around Germantown, which is a suburb. I mean, you can see on the map that they were going around purposely around that community because they knew that those white people weren't going to be okay with them coming and bringing a pipeline underground through their communities. We pushed back against it hard. Like, we were out protesting. Folks were pushing to pass different laws. We got county elected officials on board. And that's also where Justin J. Pearson and Keyshawn Pearson created the Memphis Communities Against Pollution organization. And we're, getting community members involved to continue pushing back against it. And we stayed on that issue for months. And eventually it was defeated. And so I think that if we can do that, we can definitely defeat XAI.
What about the strategy do you think was successful in defeating that pipeline?
I think that people power is unmatched. It might take a little longer sometimes, or you might, feel like it's not going as well, but people power never loses, and we were able to make sure that our community was continued to be heard, and that was enough. People were like, all right, yeah, we can't keep ignoring this issue. This is like a crucial thing, and we're going to stand with the people. And I also think there was a lot of organizing around flipping elected officials in support, because a lot of them weren't initially against it. And so trying to get those folks on board, even when our own NAACP chapter at the time was taking money from the Bahia pipeline and was supporting it and wasn't saying anything against it. So we had even black organizations who weren't supporting the issue. But luckily now, the NAACP is heavily against this data center, and there's new leadership in place that also cares about what's happening. And I think that that's also a major pivot too, a major change.
The Memphis NAACP has indeed had a change of heart. In April 2026, they sued XAI over the pollution from the Colossus facility. Legal avenues have always been one path to resisting these projects. Another is community-level science.
I do what we call empowerment science and liberation science. So we use science to empower folks to build the capacity to understand the environmental phenomena, social phenomena they're experiencing. And then with liberation science, we want to use the science, translate that data to action to liberate them from those situations. So a lot of what I do and my team does, we do a lot of what we call hyperlocal air quality monitoring. And so we've been doing some monitoring near the Colossus facility in Boxtown, and trying to measure things like ozone, nitrogen dioxides, particularly in matter, in collaboration with MCAP, which is run by Keyshawn Pearson. And of course, his brother is Justin Pearson, who's in the legislature. And so the idea is to get the data into the hands of the people so they can translate the data to action. And so we want to raise awareness, raise their environmental health literacy, and hopefully raise their agency so they can be able to do something about it.
I think it's pretty revelatory that Sakobi frames this in terms of agency. To many in Memphis and in the data center fight, this is about more than individual data center facilities. It's about fighting off the tide of monopoly power and even the national drift towards fascism. You can tell by the way he talks about this. This is about more than data centers.
As a descendant of enslaved African peoples in this country, and as someone who sees himself, I see myself as sort of continue a legacy, not to be too bold in this statement, but freedom fighters and abolitionists, right? Because that's part of the legacy, right? To whom much is given, much is expected. I've been given the opportunity to do this kind of work, and so the folks that are in those communities, I come from one of those communities, so the idea is to try to work with folks in partnership to help them. But, many of these communities, residents have been dealing with this for decades, as I said. We talk about racism, how it shows up, in this country, and it's still alive and well. I would say right now with the current administration, with some of the issues that the dismantling of environmental justice protections, the rollback of engagement funding, the rollback of the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, roll back the National Environmental Policy Act. In the end, who does that hurt the most? The communities that we're talking about. The communities have already been overburdened, right? So, I think we got to keep people engaged because it is a social movement. I was saying before, the legacy of fighting. I think that's in the spirit of a lot of these folks. You got a lot of people who've come out of these places who are fighters. They're fighting for the community. So we have to support them. We have to bridge and build around them, put our arms around them.
American history is full of revolutions that started at the local level, starting with the American Revolution and going forward. This history is particularly resonant in Memphis, where Martin Luther King gave his famed "I've been to the mountaintop" speech in support of a local sanitation workers' strike the day before his assassination. The data center fight is a clear example of a struggle that has started at the local level and can grow from there.
We cannot, I'm not saying listeners, y'all are doing this, but don't focus only on the federal level. Don't focus only on the state level. You got to be multi-level. But the place that you can get the most work done and you have the most power, if you have a social movement, it's going to be at the local level. You have to build ground up to then get to the state level and then get to the federal level.
Andrew Chow agrees.
Local fights can turn into regional fights, can turn into national fights. And so I think that's actually one of the heartening things about this is, yes, there have been a lot of communities that have been harmed, but then they've been sounding the alarm for the rest of us.
And the people sounding the alarm for the rest of us are determined and ready to keep going. I asked Amber if the goal was to stop Elon's second and third Colossus projects already underway in the Memphis area.
We want to stop all of them. We want to stop Colossus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It don't matter. However many there are, we don't want any of them.
It's clear that the people behind the data center race have their eyes on our land, ready to seize upon the communities they perceive as least prepared to fight back. But their ultimate goals may affect everyone, regardless of where they live. Tired of dealing with the rules everyone else has to follow, the data center people want to reshape and rebuild the electric grid. That means more power for them, higher profits for utilities, and higher bills for everyone else. But they should be careful they don't again underestimate their targets. Data center opposition has already surprised tech companies in how strong and widespread it is. These coalitions can strengthen around the fact that living in America is increasingly unaffordable, and higher electric bills are making that problem worse. Democrat or Republican, rich or poor, black or white, we all pay electric bills.
You think about bridging across difference, whether it be race, ethnicity, religion, nativity, political party, whatever, ratepayers. That's the bridge, right?
More on that on the next episode of Building Local Power, The Data Centers Are Coming. Building Local Power, The Data Centers Are Coming is a project of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. This episode was produced by Reggie Rucker and Alana Nevins. It was written by me, Danny Kane, based on my travels to Baltimore in January 2026 and conversations I had throughout that spring. Many thanks to Samuel Black, Andrew Chow, Jennifer Kunze, Brenda Platt, Amber Sherman, and Dr. Sakobi Wilson for their time and expertise. If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe to Building Local Power wherever you get your podcasts. We also appreciate being in conversation with you, our listeners, so please leave us a review or send questions and comments to buildinglocalpower@ilsr.org. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.